The ballroom smelled like money and old grudges. Sarah stood near the back wall with a glass of sparkling water she hadn't touched, watching her half-sister work the room like she'd been born to it, which, technically, she had. Camille moved through the crowd in her ivory gown, laughing at exactly the right moments, touching arms, tilting her chin just so. Their father's business partners watched her the way men watched things they couldn't afford and intended to buy anyway. Nobody watched Sarah. That was fine. That was, in fact, the whole point of bringing her. Someone had to manage the seating cards when the caterer got them wrong. Someone had to find the venue coordinator when the microphone cut out during the opening remarks. Someone had to stand near the back wall and make sure everything ran the way it was supposed to, invisible and efficient as a drain. She was 26 years old, and she had been invisible her entire life. "You've got something on your dress," Camille said, appearing at her elbow without warning. She gestured vaguely at Sarah's hip. "Right there. It looks like you sat in something." Sarah looked down. There was nothing there. When she looked back up, Camille was already smiling. That particular smile, the one she'd perfected sometime around age 12, equal parts apology and cruelty. A few of Camille's friends had drifted over. They were watching. "I don't see anything," Sarah said. "No, it's definitely there. It's oh, never mind." Camille's smile widened. "Maybe it's just the cut of the fabric. Some styles don't really work with every figure, do they?" The women laughed, not loudly, just enough. Sarah took a sip of her sparkling water. It tasted like nothing. Their father appeared at the edge of the group, caught Sarah's eye, and looked away again. The specific kind of looking away that meant, "Don't make a scene. Don't make this difficult. We'll talk later," which meant they would not talk later. They never talked later. Later was a country he had never actually been to. His name was Gordon Calloway, and he had married Camille's mother when Sarah was 4 years old, and he had been meaning to get around to treating Sarah like a daughter ever since. The debt was the reason they were here tonight. Sarah knew that. She had seen the numbers. She always saw the numbers, because someone had to, and her father trusted spreadsheets the way he trusted very little else, which meant he occasionally trusted Sarah. The Calloway family owed a considerable amount of money to a man named Vidal Crowe, and tonight's gala was supposed to be some kind of gesture, a handshake across a very wide and expensive table. Sarah didn't know what Crowe looked like. She'd been told he rarely attended functions like this. She assumed he had people for that, men in good suits who ate the canapes and smiled and conveyed messages in lowered voices, and nobody asked too many questions about who they worked for. She was looking at the centerpiece arrangement on the nearest table. White orchids, which had been the wrong choice. She'd told the coordinator 2 weeks ago they would wilt under the venue lighting, and she'd been ignored when the temperature in the room changed. It wasn't a thing she could have explained. It was the way the crowd shifted without visibly moving, the way conversations fractured at the edges, the way her father went very still across the room. She turned. He was standing at the top of the entrance stairs, and he was alone. Tall. Late 30s, maybe early 40s, though it was difficult to say. There was a quality to him that made age seem like a category that didn't quite apply. Dark suit, no pocket square, no tie. His hands were loose at his sides. He had a scar along his left jaw that he hadn't bothered to hide, and he wasn't smiling, and he was looking at the room the way a man looks at a set of numbers he's already finished calculating. Someone at her elbow said very quietly, "That's Crowe." She didn't know who said it. She didn't look away from him long enough to find out. Vidal Crowe descended the stairs without hurrying. The crowd rearranged itself around him the way water rearranges around something dropped into it, not because anyone was pushed, but because something in the physics of the room had simply changed. He reached the bottom of the stairs. He scanned the ballroom once, slowly. His eyes stopped on her. Sarah became aware, suddenly, that she was the only person in the immediate vicinity who was looking directly at him. Everyone else had found something fascinating to study on the floor, or their drinks, or the middle distance. She had apparently not received the instinct that made people look away. She made herself take a breath, made herself look at the orchids instead. Her father was already moving toward Crowe, hand extended, voice pitched too high with relief. She watched them shake hands. Watched Crow listen to whatever her father was saying with the expression of a man who had heard this particular kind of speech many times before and found it neither interesting nor convincing. Camille materialized beside their father within seconds. Of course she did. Camille had an instinct for power the way a compass has an instinct for north. She didn't choose it, she simply oriented toward it. Sarah watched her half-sister extend her hand to Crow, watched the smile, the chin tilt, the particular angle she used when she wanted to appear both accessible and unattainable. It was a masterclass. Sarah had studied it for 20 years and still couldn't do it. Crow shook Camille's hand. He looked at her the way he'd looked at the room, cataloguing, assessing, moving on. Then he looked across the ballroom at Sarah again. She had no idea what to do with that, so she finished her sparkling water and went to deal with the orchids. The venue coordinator found her 20 minutes later, when Sarah was in the corridor outside the main hall, explaining to a very young catering assistant that no, the dessert course could not go out yet because the speeches hadn't finished, and yes, she understood they were behind schedule, and no, that was not going to change the timing of the speeches, Miss Calloway. The coordinator, a woman named Brenda who had been mildly hostile to Sarah since their first email exchange in February, was holding a small card. "Mr. Crow is asking to speak with you." Sarah looked at her. "With me?" That's what his associate said. There must be a mistake. He should be speaking with my father, or with... He was very specific. He said, Brenda glanced at the card. He said the woman with the spreadsheet. Sarah had sent the event budget projection to her father's office 3 weeks ago. She had no idea how that had become anyone else's information. "All right," she said. She was shown to a small room off the main corridor, a kind of antechamber, the sort of room venues keep for exactly this type of conversation, private and unremarkable. There was a table with 2 chairs and a glass of water on each side, and Vidal Crow was standing at the window with his back to her when she came in. He turned when he heard the door. Up close, the scar was more visible, a clean line along the jaw, old enough that the skin had settled around it. He looked tired in the way that people look tired when they've been tired for so long that tired has become simply the texture of their existence. There were lines at the corners of his eyes that she didn't think were from smiling. "Sit down," he said. "I'd rather stand, thank you." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite surprise, more like the recalibration a person makes when a variable doesn't behave the way the model predicted. "All right," he said. He didn't sit either. "You put together the Calloway event budget." "I did. You flagged a discrepancy in the venue deposit." She had. $1,200 overpaid to the caterer, which the caterer had not flagged because caterers don't generally flag overpayments. She'd caught it in the third pass of the line items. "Yes," she said. "Who checked your work?" "Nobody." He looked at her. "Nobody. Nobody in my father's office has the patience for that level of detail. I don't need anyone to check my work." She said it flatly, without pride, because it wasn't pride, it was just true. The way the discrepancy in the deposit had been true, the way numbers were always just true once you knew how to read them. Crow was quiet for a moment. He had the stillness of someone who didn't fill silence the way most people did, reflexively, defensively, because silence felt like something to be managed. He just stood in it. "Your father's accounts," he said finally. "He has a leak." I'm sorry. Someone in his operation is moving money. Not a lot. Careful amounts, the kind that don't trigger flags in standard reviews." He paused. "But not careful enough to miss in a very specific kind of review." Sarah said nothing. "I want to know who," he said. "And I need someone who can find it in the numbers without tipping anyone that they're looking." She understood then why she was in this room. Not because of the gala. Not because of her father's debt or Camille's smile, or any of the reasons people usually noticed or didn't notice Sarah Calloway. Because of $1,200 in a catering deposit. "You're asking me to investigate my father's own accounts," she said. "I'm offering you a contract. Standard terms, legitimate compensation." He reached into his jacket and set a folded paper on the table. "You'd have 30 days. She didn't touch the paper. "And my father's debt?" Separate matter, is it? His eyes were dark and very steady, and she had the feeling, standing there, that he had never once in his life said anything he didn't mean to say. If you find what I'm looking for, he said, the debt becomes renegotiable. That's the most honest answer I can give you. She looked at the paper on the table. She thought about the orchids wilting under the lights in the ballroom, about Camille's smile, about her father looking away, about $1,200 in a catering invoice that nobody had bothered to catch because it was her job to catch things, and nobody was interested in her job. She picked up the paper. The offices were in a building in the financial district, with a name on the door that didn't correspond to anything she could find in a standard corporate registry search, which she found either reassuring or deeply alarming, depending on which hour it was. She was given a desk, an access code, and a set of files that took her breath away, not because of what they contained, but because of the state they were in. Years of transaction records, layered and cross-referenced in a system that was either a deliberate obfuscation or the accounting equivalent of a natural disaster, possibly both. The first day she said nothing to anyone. She organized. The second day she started finding things. Small ones at first, rounding errors that were too consistent to be errors, vendor invoices that referenced services with no corresponding delivery records. The pattern was patient. Whoever was doing this had been doing it for a long time. Crow came by in the late afternoon, not every day, but often enough that she stopped being startled by the sound of the door. He never asked how it was going. He looked at what was on her screen, sometimes asked a single question, and left. She found this preferable to the alternative, which was people asking how it was going when they had no intention of engaging with the actual answer. On the third day, he came in while she was eating lunch at the desk, a sandwich from the place across the street that was only acceptable if you asked them to leave off the sauce, and she didn't look up. "The Renault account," she said. "The one marked inactive since 2019. She heard him stop. "It's not inactive," she said. "The label's inactive. The underlying transfer authority's been reassigned. Whoever did it was counting on nobody going back that far." She looked up. He was standing in the doorway with his jacket over his arm, and his eyes on her in a way that felt different from how he'd looked at her in the ballroom. In the ballroom she'd been a variable. Here she was something else, though she couldn't have named what. "How far back did you go?" he said. 2014. A pause. "Nobody told you to go that far. Nobody told me not to." He looked at her for a long moment. The afternoon light from the window came through at an angle and caught the scar along his jaw, and she noticed that he held his left shoulder slightly lower than his right. An old injury, she thought, the kind that had healed imperfectly and was no longer painful enough to think about, but still shaped the way he moved. "Eat your lunch," he said, and left. She ate her lunch. The name, when she found it, was not the name she expected. She had been looking at peripheries. Vendors, contractors, anyone with access but not visibility. The leak wasn't at the periphery. The leak was someone who had been at her father's right hand for 9 years. She sat with that for a while before she told anyone. She told Crow on a Thursday evening, when the building was mostly empty, and the city outside had settled into the particular grey of a Toronto night in November. She pulled up the chain on her screen and walked him through it. The Renault account, the reassigned authorities, the 7 years of careful small withdrawals that added up to something that was not small at all when you put them on a single page. He stood behind her shoulder and read it in silence. "His name is Alderton," she said. "He has a secondary account under a numbered company registered in Manitoba." She had printed the registration records. She set them on the desk beside the keyboard. "He's been meticulous, but he made the same mistake in 2 different years. The withdrawal timing aligns with your quarterly close, which means he had access to your schedule, which means it's not just someone in your father's operation," Crow said. "No," Sarah said. "It's someone in yours." The room was quiet. Outside, traffic. Inside, the sound of the ventilation system and her own pulse, which she was trying to ignore. "You're sure?" he said. "I have 4 independent corroborating threads." "Yes, I'm sure." She could feel him behind her, not touching her, not particularly close, but she was aware of him the way she was aware of weather, the kind that hadn't arrived yet but was present in the quality of the air. "You didn't have to tell me that last part," he said. "You asked me to find the truth. Most people, when they realize the truth is inconvenient for the person who hired them. I'm not most people," she said, "and you already knew that." She felt rather than heard him exhale. It wasn't quite a laugh. It was the sound a person makes when they've been carrying something at a careful distance for a long time and have been unexpectedly reminded that they're still human. "No," he said. "I did." She made herself stay looking at the screen, made herself not turn around, because turning around felt like a thing with consequences she wasn't prepared to think through yet, and she was very good at not doing things she wasn't prepared for. "My father's debt," she said. "I said it would be renegotiable. I know what you said." She paused. "I want something more specific than renegotiable." He was quiet for a moment, then, "The debt is cleared. As of today," she absorbed that. Just like that. Just like that. She looked at the records on the screen, 7 years of someone else's careful dishonesty, laid out in columns and totals and the kind of clarity that only numbers had, the kind that didn't care about feelings or intentions or who anyone's father was. "I'll need to write up a clean summary of the findings," she said. "Something you can use if this goes further. I know. It'll take another day." "Take 2. She finally turned. He was closer than she'd thought. Not close, but closer. And he was looking at her with an expression that was doing something complicated near the edges, something she didn't quite have a category for. He looked very briefly, like a man who had forgotten to be careful. "Why did you look at me?" she said. "At the gala, before you ever saw a spreadsheet." He didn't answer immediately. He looked at the window, outside the grey of the city. "Because you were the only person in the room who looked back," he said. She thought about that. She thought about Camille tilting her chin, her father shaking hands, the orchids wilting under the lights because she'd been right, and nobody had cared that she was right. "That's not a very reassuring reason," she said. "No," he agreed. He picked up his jacket from the chair where he'd set it, but it was true. He moved toward the door, stopped. "Dinner," he said. "Tomorrow, to go over the summary." A pause, "Or to go over nothing if you'd prefer." She looked at him at the scar and the tired eyes and the way he held his shoulder. 7 o'clock, she said. He didn't smile. But something in the line of his jaw shifted, just slightly, the way a locked room sounds different when the bolt finally gives. 7 o'clock, he said, and left. Sarah turned back to the screen. The numbers were still there, patient and clear and waiting. She looked at them for a long time. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent and enormous, and she sat in the quiet of a room that no longer felt entirely like someone else's, and for the first time in a very long time she did not feel like a footnote in someone else's accounting of the night.